I want to talk not so much about institutions as about men. Let me start out by explaining that focus, and then we'll go into some points about why and what needs to happen. Now, I was told that I'm supposed to offer, and that's what it says on your program, that I'm here to offer solutions. That seems pretty arrogant of me. I'm not going to offer solutions. What I want to give you are things that I think we can't really steer around. We have to deal with them. So if they become solutions, if we think through them, if we use them, that's wonderful. That's well and good. I don't see them as proposals so much as inevitable things. And I think they're inevitable because I believe that any challenge that we face in the life of the church is an exercise like Josiah and Hezekiah have in the Old Testament as to whether we will actually believe and live as if Scripture is sufficient for the church's life. Are we going to read it and then leave it aside? We will keep not doing the Passover, as it were. What will we do? So the four things that I'm going to point out from the Scriptures, I don't see as solutions in the sense of here's a clever idea, here's a new way of funding something, here's a new way of instruction. These things have changed, not only throughout history, but other speakers have spoken about them yesterday and today to you. So what I want to talk about are men. The reason being, I don't see that the Lord himself, when he is setting into motion the apostolic ministry, focuses on institutional preservation in the same sense that you could say, how do I pay for the academy or the grove in which Plato instructs his students outside of Athens to exist? How do we make sure that nobody cuts down the trees so that they have something to sit under while Plato talks to them? Instead, he's worried about having a certain kind, obviously a number consonant with the Old Testament, that's the 12, because he is sending them out to bring in from all the nations an Israel which will confess his name. So he needs to begin with 12. But what kind of men they are is the chief consideration. You can see this continued in the ministry of the apostles, simply in the lists, and we'll talk about them a little bit later in this hour. I think I have about 50 minutes. I'll stop and we'll leave time for questions, maybe 45 minutes. It would be nice to talk. But I think you're going to see that when you look at those lists, they are about what kind of a man the guy is. There is some qualification about what is called apt to teach. But as Wilhelm Leah points out, he's really the founding father of the Fort Wayne Seminary from a distance. As he points out in his book on pastoral theology, The Pastor, that the chief requirement for a man is piety, sincerity of confession, and humility. His aptness to teach may be great, it may be very little, but he talks extensively about in his time with the German educational system that is the background to our own present educational system, kind of the grandfather of our educational system. And he went through all of it. And I think he's qualified to say this because he was obviously himself a brilliant, academically capable man. He said, the best thing would be sincerity of confession with humility. You can always learn more, but if you are proud, you will do great damage. So the focus for him, and I think for the Lord and his apostles, is on the man. Institutional debates, institutional prerogatives, funding, that can be whatever it is. I think the focus has to be on the man, whatever else we're talking about, whatever else we're debating. I think otherwise, the man gets treated as if he were a statistic. And this is where phrases like shortage are not ones that I find particularly apt. Here's why. Number one, they have to do with a match between pastors supplied to extant congregations that doesn't ask what is going on in that congregation, or should that congregation, which is 5 miles away, maybe in town, or maybe it was built out in the country, should that consolidate with another congregation? So it's just asking a question that is a snapshot of today's reality. When you do that, when you're just basing your decisions that may affect people, it affects the pastors for generations, for years, for decades, and that was based on a decision made 3 years before he even entered seminary, what his life would be shaped like. or that he would be sent to one congregation that has 25 people on a Sunday and another that has 40 with an average age of such and such that is itself unsustainable. And maybe the town itself is declining for various reasons and they don't need as many people home on the farm as they did when the congregation out in the country was built. And you're saying shortage. We need better data in order to say, circuit by circuit, district by district, where are we actually short in something that needs to be supplied? So before we claim shortage or we claim a stat, we need to be very clear that we are talking about what both present and anticipated supply, if we can, for that the duration of that man's ministry would be. So let's do that. I love stats, but I don't want to reduce the man or sum up his career in terms of you were trained this way or you were trained that way because of stats we were discussing back when you were 21. And your life is now shaped by that forever. In addition to that, some of these stats should be fairly predictable based on our denomination's general age. There is something that I'm going to talk about a little bit later that I think has a lot to do with it among the ministers themselves. But if I look at our denomination's general age, it is predictable that I would have relatively fewer and fewer young men going into the ministry after the crest of the baby boom. And anecdotally, I don't have stats. I work on theology, not math, but anecdotally, generally, the older the pastor, the bigger his graduating class from either seminary, or it was at least as big, if it was considered small in his day, as an average class would be today. So we know, and President Bruss referenced that as a retirement cliff, we know that that is coming. From the pastor's perspective, a shortage is not necessarily bad. It gives your congregation a sense of value to your existence that maybe in that same congregation you wouldn't have had 50 years earlier. It's not so bad. It does require from the pastors more work, man by man. I found from the 1890s a synodical report that referenced that the average pastor was somehow caring for 3 congregations and running 1 school. What he did, what his life was like, what his day was like, how well he knew his children. I don't know any of that, and I'm not here to make judgments about it. I have guesses, that's all I have. But I want to note that the assumption was he is moving around within some geographic area, and he is caring for a wide range of people, not just the ones in the town where he lives, if he lives in the parsonage at the church right next to the house he lives in. That was normal. So I also think that if you know enough history, you can imagine future possibilities both for education as well, and this is my particular concern this morning, for pastoral work that are different than they have been since roughly World War II, when we settled into a pattern of one pastor, one congregation, and the pastor doesn't have to run a school even if he has a school. It could be different in the future, and that could be wonderful for us. So I don't want stats to determine what we're doing. Also, for this reason, and then we'll begin to talk about these 4, what I think are criteria or non-negotiables far more than they are solutions. When we talk about stats or we talk about sacrifice in the ministry, it is one thing to say that something is given up under conditions that were prevalent, and I'll give you an example in a second, 30 years ago versus today. A couple decades ago, and some of you will know this or remember this, maybe you were even there at some point during the day, your dad dropped you off there. The Fort Wayne Seminary had a daycare. I cannot really imagine the Fort Wayne Seminary or the student body demanding a daycare at this point. Things have changed. That also means that the economic sources for the man's life have also changed. If you want to treat people with harshness, you can do that, but you have to understand what you are asking of them. And if you made the same sacrifice they did, where possibly today the guy already has 3 kids, he's the sole breadwinner, and then he goes to seminary. That's fairly normal, what I just described. There's no daycare anymore. When we treat people as stats, we flatten out their lives, and we don't know them or care for them as well as we possibly could. This is the first non-negotiable. That you can tell as they enter into the pastoral ministry that the chief consideration, go ahead and check out 1 Timothy 3 or Titus 1. You can turn there if you want. I'm not going to read through it or anything. We'll just discuss it. Involves knowledge of a man to fit him for the ministry that has very little to do with his academic qualifications. I don't say that because I think academics are wrong. I have more degrees than many people in the room, probably. I like school. I like teaching school. But that's not the chief consideration. I could have all those degrees and it wouldn't matter if I couldn't manage my own household. I could have all those degrees and it wouldn't matter if I were a drunkard. I say those things very plainly because I don't hear people saying that plainly. So the question, whatever the modality is, however much acquaintance or where he finds them, I don't know where Titus is finding people exactly. Is he getting them from that town, or he brought them from somewhere else, from the mainland, or he brought, I don't know, from the Levant. I don't know where he got them, but he's putting them there according to Paul's command. And the job description generally has to do with the kinds of things you can only know if you know him well. How does his private life, we call it private life, but for a pastor it's really not. How does his home life run? What is it like? Does he understand how to motivate his wife and his children to do good things that are for the good of the family? All these kinds of little things that do have to do with what kind of a guy he is are the essence, as they are also the essence of the problem generally when our pastors get into trouble and thereby destroy or at least grievously wound congregations. Usually the failings are personal. They are sometimes, strictly speaking, theological, and strictly speaking can be settled intellectually. He has, and I have heard this, I'll just give you an example, obviously anonymized. The gentleman is now retired, if it makes you feel better about this. But I heard a very basic presentation in a circuit meeting of the doctrine of election and the formula of concord. You can supply in your own head which article that is, right? So this is presented, it's really kind of simple. I think we were just doing the epitome. So that's kind of your Cliff Notes version anyway of what the formula of concord says and what election is. And a pastor who at the time was pretty old, he had been in the ministry for decades, said, I don't teach that. That was a strictly theological problem. Much more often, his wife leaves him on a Saturday night. Much more often, things that maybe could have been known by his friends at seminary but aren't known by the professors, I can speak from personal experience in this regard, cause his life to blow up 6 years after he's ordained. All of this has to do with personal knowledge of the man. However you get that done, that has to get done. If it doesn't get done, you will have, in this world, even more problems than you used to have, because the temptations to sin and the things to which these young men are exposed in their daily lives are far worse, even I would say horrific, than the things that you were raised to be tempted to. This gets into the 3 non-negotiables for him. So if we talk about that's the gate that has to be there, what kind of a man is he? Are the various people, whether the different pastors, President Bruss named, or anyone else that's there in that kind of chain of approval, his district president, the district committee, the certification and placement committee, the whatever else, the entire faculty of the seminary at some point. That's the gate. And if the gate is not kept on a personal level, it really doesn't matter how much he has read of Koontz. I will say that. He can read Koontz and not be a pastor, and then we will be safe. But if he reads Koontz and he's a drunk, his congregation will suffer in ways nobody's predicting. The 3 non-negotiables for him have to do, I think, with the kind of change that is undergone by the men on the road to Emmaus, if you can walk through this with me. Think about where they are when they start, when the Lord encounters them. When he encounters them, you'll remember that they're downcast. They have quite a bit of knowledge of what should have happened, but not a sense of a way forward. And if you're thinking about Luke's gospel, you remember that Luke's gospel starts with an interrupted service. Zechariah is supposed to come out and bless. He can't because he's been struck dumb because of his own incredulity, his own unbelief concerning the Lord's message. So it's not that they haven't heard the Lord's message the way Zechariah also heard the message from the angel. They've been with him. They're even walking in this kind of mockery of the way that he has sent them. First the 12 and then the 70, 2 by 2. They're together, but they're not going to be taking what he has taught, beginning from Jerusalem, really anywhere else. So there is a kind of dysfunction there that also involves their confidence and their bitterness that sounds very familiar if you have ever seen an anonymous post in a pastor's group on Facebook or been to a circuit meeting. Discouragement, depression, unsure that what they're doing has ever mattered at all, great disappointment. And they say to Jesus, of all people, now they don't know it's him, and you know that part. But you can tell how bitter they are that with somebody who they have not encountered, they are willing to be really kind of snippy about, are you the only person who hasn't heard this? Don't you know how bad things are? And don't you know how disappointing he has proven to be? And the brothers at the circuit meeting don't talk that way about the Lord, but they talk that way about his ministry that he has given to them. Their disappointment, their maltreatment, their sadness, the difficulties in their household because of the work that they're doing. And your heart goes out to them. And you'll notice that Jesus doesn't berate them for this bitterness. He does something which I think is always fruitful, but it's fruitful particularly because no matter how much a mind is made up, a question can possibly open it. He says, what do you mean? You tell me how bad it is. You tell me what is the problem. You say in your own words. And so I think, like the need for localized and regionalized statistics on what could consolidate and what needs to go away, and the fact that we only have like 1 or 2 congregations in certain states that have a lot more than 1,000 or 2,000 people in them, you have to know on an individual level, with the man who is preparing as well as with the man who has already been called into the Lord's service and ordained, what is going on with him. And if he cannot be open-hearted with you, if there is distrust, or it has been reduced to a kind of rhetorical process, and then we'll all vote on it, you know as well as I do that it will not heal the wound. So the things that I'm saying have to do with the wounds, not necessarily with the process whereby, hopefully, our church heals them. Here are the 3 wounds that could be healed in ways that I hope are helpful to you, drawn from what Jesus seems to be looking at as he is getting these guys ready, and then passes on that ministry through his apostles, into which we also have been called. If we can assume that there will be continuing confusion, not just about Christianity, not just about Lutheranism, but about very broad, vague categories in a country where people have little to no religious education, then we need pastors who are absolutely clear communicators. This involves bringing back terminology as well as methods of preparing them. The terminology that was used very often in German, and we don't use at all anymore, is servants of the divine word. Servants of the divine word. And the focus, and you can hear it in the language that is used, say in Walther's pastoral theology, the focus is on the pastoral office, not chiefly, and that adverb is going to be important, not chiefly as a liturgist, not chiefly as a counselor, not chiefly as any of the other multitude of things that you do, including I fixed a dehumidifier 2 weeks ago. First time I've ever done it. Really great stuff. I guess that's part of the ministry. What is the chief part of the ministry? What is the focus of the ministry? It has always been called preaching. You can see a remnant of this in the folk culture of our people. I'm not saying what they're doing in this regard is good, but you can see what they have been taught from long ago matters, that very rarely will they leave before the sermon, but if they're in a rush, they might leave before communion. That doesn't tell you, go do that yourself. And I'm not telling you, go do that. I'm saying they know in some kind of back part of their mind, I need to be here for the sermon. Why does this matter so much, particularly in a time of great confusion? Because I can no longer rely on the power of comfortable slogans. My people don't hear them. They're mostly on the internet, and who knows what they're learning there or thinking about there. But also, there is very little inertia pushing them back into church week after week after week, unless there is a sense of, here's how we're growing, here's what we're learning, here's what we're hearing about, here's what we're doing next. This is what the Lord is showing us from the scriptures. If we don't focus on that, there's a lot about what we currently do that doesn't make any sense, like learning the original languages. The reason Protestant seminaries emphasized that immediately upon the Reformation, and Wittenberg's curriculum became almost like we would deride it as a Bible college, just Bible, 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 was because they believed that if they studied these things in the original, they were opening up the oracles of God. So if you could get in there and then you could communicate that, and then a normal person who manages a Casey's could understand the significance of that in his everyday life, wouldn't that be incredible? So the focus in the training was on the Bible so that the focus in the ministry could be on the preaching. Clarity, absolutely necessary always, but I think more necessary than ever in the future, because I don't see our country becoming less confused, less emotionally driven in its thinking, or anything like that. If we presume continuing general decay or temptations to sin being everywhere present, I'll just give you a little stat I read in the New York Times, so maybe now you won't believe it at all, and that's okay with me, but it was an article about a guy that was arrested basically for wire fraud, who was presenting himself as a giant. He was a sports betting king. That's in fact the title of the article. It's kind of an entertaining article, but the stat provided by the gambling industry itself was that 48% of men in the United States have a sports betting app, at least one on their phones. So if they could instantly access the most vile things on their phone already, now they can do that, and then they can shift over, open up the screens thing, move to a different app, and they can lose their life savings, if it's Super Bowl Sunday, maybe in a matter of hours. We've always walked in danger all the way. I just don't see it getting less dangerous. So you'll notice among those qualifications that are laid out in 1 Timothy and in Titus, they have to do with what you could sum up as integrity. The man's life, if I can say it this way, is not distracted. Think about the images that Paul uses for the ministry. A farmer, a soldier, does any soldier serve at his own expense? These kinds of things. If you're a farmer or if you're a soldier, are you supposed to develop a bunch of other things in your life that are going to distract you from getting out in the field really early, and then in October or November being out really, really late, maybe all night sometimes, should you get something else going on? I don't think so. Those qualifications are not there so that we can have the moral satisfaction of saying, I manage my own household and he doesn't. They're there for the man's own good, so that he is not distracted and his life is not chaotic. It's also the reason we don't want our pastors to carry student debt with them their entire careers. It cripples him. It troubles all his thoughts. That's the reason for the qualifications. That involves a way of thinking about the ministry that is a little bit more like a word. My dad was career military, that it would be nice if we could use it sometimes, that they use when you qualify for certain things, and that word is selection. You qualify to go to a certain course. You go. Not everybody makes it out. The standards are high. The higher the standard, guess what? The more guys want to do it. Seems like guys are actually motivated by difficulty. Guys are motivated by being asked to do something very hard. Seems like that's how it actually works. If you roll out of the course before you're done, you're still in the Army. But you're not going to be a Ranger, or you're not going to be Delta Force, or you're not going to be whatever else there is. The way of looking at that involves ongoing both assessment by people who know him as a human being and his own self-assessment, and training him to be able to say at some point, I can't do this, either before he's ordained or, if need be, regrettably, sometime thereafter. I can't do this. It's not good for the church that I do this. I can get another way to pay the bills. I can't do this anymore. If he can't say that, if he cannot open his heart to anyone else in the church until it's too late, and he mysteriously is off the roster, and his classmates read about it in the reporter, that's too late for him, that's too late for his family, that's too late for his church, that's too late for anybody who cares about him. But if that process is not in place, if it's not more like selection, I don't think that we will get guys of a quality that will do the amount of work it is very possible they may have to do in the future, even of a 1890 variety, 3 congregations running 1 school. Because he needs to be difficult with himself, and other people need to ask him pointed questions. If a process like that is not in place, I don't really think it matters if we have millions of pastors or 50. Because you need quality. You'll notice that the Lord doesn't specify any quantity. He's very specific about quality. He's frustratingly, for us, trained on management theory and trained by sports broadcasts to idolize stats. He's super vague about the math. The third non-negotiable has to do with recapturing the way that Jesus looks at the rest of the world. Everybody who's not currently in, think about the way that John talks about the death of Jesus in his letter. And he died not for our sins only, but for the sins of the whole world. I do not find, certainly not in our forefathers, any opposition between diligent care and cultivation of the Christians who are already in your parish and the salvation of anyone else you can talk to who isn't yet in your parish. This will become more obvious the smaller and more isolated, geographically or however other isolated, our parishes become. It's easier to see than ever that if we actually have the truth that we claim to have, we would not be satisfied to let anyone go without it. Why would we sit on our hands and let them not have this? Would it be greed? Would it be complacency? I think in terms of the disciples on the road to Emmaus, it is a sense that Jesus will not move the story forward. That he has taken it thus far, or Walther has brought us thus far, or whoever your heroes are have brought us thus far, and Jesus is not going to be taking anything forward. So we're going to deal with present needs, and we will treat people in accordance with present needs, and damage will be done in accordance with present needs. And who knows if that will actually change anything about our pastorate or the way that they talk when they talk at their circuit meeting, or probably likelier if they go to lunch and then it's not really a function anymore, and now they're maybe sitting with their friends in a booth, what they say is going on, which is honestly, predominantly difficult, hard, and not just those things, of course, but discouraging because of a sense that there is no particular future. So the disciples on the road to Emmaus have this, right? Because they know that Jesus is a prophet and they know this, but they're not really nothing is going to happen until and unless their minds, which are closed or locked down, sure of how things are going to turn out and sure of what needs to happen. And you know that the 12 have their own version of this because their big concern is government persecution, or at least informal persecution, so they have locked the doors. You know that. Jesus has to open up their minds as he explains to them the scriptures. I don't say this as a piece of naivete, like we just, and I think unfortunately it sounds that way. We just have to get back to the Bible. Guess what? When something is difficult, when something is hard, you sing about this stuff, but think about what you're saying when you sing. The Bible is what you have. The Word of God is what you have. It is the one thing needful for your ministry. If you don't have it, you could have all the other things and you would have nothing. You could have societal prerogatives. You could have great finances. You could have incredible demographics. You could live in a nice new exurb of a Midwestern city, ensuring both growth and plenty of stable Lutheran population. And I would be happy for you. But if you don't have the Word of God, it doesn't matter. And if you don't use the Word of God to settle your difficulties or the church's difficulties, none of the rest of it matters. We're interested in quality, not quantity. So Jesus, one guy talking to two guys, opens up the Bible again in a way maybe we would find naive. What does the Bible actually say a pastor is supposed to be? Is that what's going on in my ministry? Is something missing? Is something too hard? Do I have a danger coming among the dangers listed? Or if a man wants to be a pastor, before I ask where he will fit in the stats and what currently we have as far as projected enrollment for the fall, I want to know instead, what kind of a man is he? And I would observe that generally the students' problems have to do with those things, and less often with academic problems. There are academic problems. There's a certain amount he needs to know. Usually the big stuff, or the stuff that you need to spend time talking about with him and with others, involves his life. If it is possible to do so, whether when he is being formed, or you can hear I have great concern just for the quality of a pastor's life in service to Christ, which involves enormous sacrifice, but also remember that when Peter talks about this present fiery trial, he talks about grievous difficulties. Peter also speaks concerning joy. Is the pastor's life dominated by the fact of some fault which is destroying his ministry, causing him constant anxiety? Or is he able, with the kind of stable life that Titus and 1 Timothy require him to have, is he able instead to proclaim the gospel with joy? And therefore to run his course like his Lord, despising the shame with joy, like a strong man, able to keep going. Because I want us to be able to keep going. And I want men to be not just asked, not just requested, not just suggested, but inspired to seek death in the Lord's service. Because then we will be ready for whatever the future brings, whether it brings persecution or whether it brings simply the humdrum, day-to-day difficulties, sacrifices, and problems that are part of the ministry, really part of any job that involves people. If he is not pushed by a sense of what the future is because Jesus is alive, there's not a whole lot we can do with him or for him. Two things that I think would help us face these non-negotiables. And then we'll make sure that we have some time left over to talk. Okay. One is that we need what I have tried to give you this morning, which is open-hearted discussion. I'm not speaking politically. I'm not speaking in terms of political processes or elections. Those things have their place. I am speaking concerning the wounds that I see in Israel. And those cannot be healed by any process, however well done. If there is no openness of heart, there will be no solution. You know this from small-scale conflicts in churches about carpet colors as well as about weightier things. So there has to be openness of heart. You cannot feel that when you are dealing with people, there's always a giant agenda in back of his eyes. In addition to openness of heart, if we can admit that the process we most need is a seeking of the Lord's will out of the scriptures, this is the very thing we need to do on a local level. And I thank God, honestly, that not only my circuit, but the brothers in the other districts, I'm non-geographic, so if you hate me, go ahead and hate me, that's okay. We spoke English a long time ago, so we're still English. We're still speaking English, it's really good. That we are able to talk about these things, even before lunch. What is actually occurring? What is going on? How many people actually come on Sunday to your church? How long that could keep going? If you don't have that, this is not sentimentality about local is all that matters. Higher levels matter a lot. They can affect local immediately and drastically. But if that is not happening locally, a guy from farther away, regionally, the district, nationally, whatever, can't do a whole lot to fix what is wrong locally. The brothers there need to work to do that. They are on the same team, and the goal is not the size of their parish or the size of his or saying good riddance to bad rubbish. The goal is the spread of the gospel of God through the proclamation of that gospel. No one is going to hear without someone preaching. And if I'm not sure how to do it, or I'm not sure I can keep doing it, or I'm not sure that I'm actually focused where Jesus is focused on the world, on every single sinner, the assistant manager of Casey's, even if he doesn't go to church. If I don't have that focus and the brothers don't share it and we're not working toward it, a lot of the rest of it isn't going to matter much. I am asking for us to be renewed by God's word. It is inerrant. Let's use it. It is infallible. So if we're using it, it's not going to let us down in the future. If it speaks concerning Christ, that means that the more we're using it and sticking to it and even governing our lives and making hard decisions according to it, the more that it will fill us with the knowledge of the grace of God in Christ Jesus. We don't really have time to focus any longer on anything else. Thank you.
I want to say thank you for bringing the qualitative to the discussion.
Yeah.
Rather than merely the quantitative.
Right.
And I want to thank you for bringing attention to the needs of the student in the formation process.
Love those guys.
Because education is supposed to be about the student.
It is about the student. Yep.
Well,
correct.
but it's not always about
You're
the
right.
student,
You're right.
and it's supposed to be about the student.
Yeah.
And so I want to thank you for bringing into the discussion both the qualitative piece, not merely the quantitative,
Yeah.
and for focusing the discussion on the needs of the student.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. That was really fantastic.
Yeah.
I want to ask a question of the group here on this qualitative piece. I think, frankly, and you've been at the seminary, Pastor Koontz, there are guys who probably just don't belong there, right? How satisfied is our church? How ready are you for us to turn down more students, more applicants, in order to raise the quality? This is a leg of our strategic plan is to raise the quality. We got to, in order to do that, we've got to have a wider hopper at the top. So this is
Sure.
why I'm talking about numbers.
Yeah.
But does the church have it? And like we've got a DP here. I'd love to hear that. I think that one high quality pastor is better than 4 mediocre ones.
Yeah. I taught, I mean, we were an online seminary in spring of 2020. So I have taught at an online seminary, as it were, if you can accept it. And what the part that was missing was the part that had to do with personal knowledge and love and understanding of what was going on in his life. Instructionally, it was kind of like running YouTube channel with a chat. And so they had fun in the chat, but the part that was missing was them. It wasn't about delivery of a certain amount of information by me, which is actually easier to achieve online because they're kind of more sedentary. Sedentary is all I could say. They're just kind of staring at you, or unfortunately the camera's turned off or whatever. They're grown men. I'm not going to lecture them about turning their camera on, but the information dump is easier online because it's a lecture format, and it does work that way. If you've ever done like a webinar, that it's efficient that way.
Dr. Bruss's comment, as a district president, it is the hard issue to deal with guys that are struggling with Timothy, right? Just again, nothing in that is about intellectual capacity, right? It's probably the biggest struggle I have as men who are challenged by their anger, which is a personal problem of mine sometimes as well. But kind of their ability to maintain. So I think that's where, Dr. Bruss, I would say, absolutely, it's. I think the challenge all along the way is how we're able to, finding those metrics or some kind of process where we can actually determine guys that need to be, slivered off or whatever you call it. I think that's where the interesting thing in my experience has been the pushback that I've gotten from a lot of guys that don't want to deal with the personal. And not a lot, but guys that want to avoid that at pastors' conferences or in circuit, right?
It's easy.
So one of the things kind of the question I would have is, some of this is organic, right? It just has to happen kind of organically, but there can be some kind of systems in place that we've done trying to work, with our circuit visitors. How can you help your circuit be a place of joy, right? Of acceptance, right? And in that process, then you can do some loving correction. But you got to actually get to know guys. And too often in our synod, and I think too often our idea of formation is all about the intellectual capacity. I guess, are there systems that you would recommend in terms of, helping us move into that area because we'd rather have information than transformation.
Yeah, and I think that information and transformation are going to go together, and that, but I mean, topically, for example, we'll often talk about something very abstractly, or we'll talk about it as if it's merely an apologetic concern outside of us, instead of talking, I mean, topically, you could say, how are we doing application in our sermons? Do the people of God understand how this text applies to them? I think there are topics that you can bring up for the guys that are like, I just want information. I'm going because I like the speaker, or whatever, that they can start to think, oh, the Bible actually intends not only to renew my mind, but also my strength and my spirit. The whole thing is being transformed by the Word of God. I think that there are topics, especially, I'm just thinking of the guys you're talking about, right? I think if you say to the pastor, the topic of the discussion is families and how they work, he should be interested. But if that can be somehow, he likes history, that can be somehow phrased as a dogmatic concern, whatever, to get people talking about these things, because it's always there. You hit pay dirt. It's when you talk about it, because you get a certain quality of silence that you don't get when we're kind of gassing off about Missouri Synod history or something. You see what I'm saying? Yeah.
Addressing Dr. Bruss's question, Pastor Goodroad, and anyone else who has a thought.
I'll try to be really brief with this. Addressing Dr. Bruss's question, I want to quote Dr. Masaki, a very beloved professor at the seminary. Wrong question. It feels like you shouldn't really necessarily be asking whether the church is ready for us to reject more men from the seminary, because that's kind of given to the seminary to do in the first place, regardless of whether or not the 100%. Church wants you to do that. Yeah. That just falls within that office naturally. If they don't like it, well, then get somebody in that office who won't do it, I guess.
So let me answer your question with an anecdote.
Nice. Yeah, that's good.
We all know guys who have come out who were utter train wrecks in the first year. And we say to ourselves, how did nobody see this coming? I'm old and I've been a cynic since I was young.
Beautiful.
And in a certain circle of my friends, the phrase is, well, I guess his check's cleared. We're ready.
On similar topic, I think one of the reasons, Dr. Koontz, you spoke about having the willingness or the openness of heart to be able to have those pointed conversations.
Yeah.
I think that's essential. I remember as a student at the seminary, one of the fears of ever being able to have that kind of a pointed conversation was it felt like, should I ever do that?
Right.
It's an automatic disqualification. And so I think one of the things that needs to go hand in hand, both at the seminary and district presidents, as you're interviewing and talking to guys before ever sending them, is not just, here's the 12 pitfalls, and if you express anything close to one of them, you're done, you're out forever. Is maybe now's not the right time because you've got to get this fixed.
Yeah, sure.
The quality of the man can grow and can change. And I think that the way in which we have those pointed conversations, which are essential at every level, they need to be conversations, as opposed to instilling this fear of, if I say the one wrong word to the one wrong guy, I'm out forever.
Yeah. And it's depending on his hobby horses too. So you got to figure out what the hobby horses are. Yeah.
Yeah, I just appreciated what you had said towards the end about online teaching when you're in 2020 during COVID. Yeah, 2020. And I just think it's important. I think our district president here was wise too in what he was saying, that sort of reaffirm that if we're just talking about the imparting of information, it's not a good argument that itself for a residential seminary model. So I just think we need to be careful of that.
Yep.
But if it's about formation, as you put, transformation, so many other areas that apply to education.
Yeah. Right.
Then then that's part of the argument that needs to be made. But if it's just simply an argument over who can impart information better, I think that's a dangerous path to go down.
Right.
So,
yep. Yeah, and I just, if I can comment just a second on that, is that in graduate school at a giant public university, things were moving increasingly online, and this is like 8 years ago. So I was teaching a balance when I started, and I was teaching predominantly online by the time I was done with graduate school, because it is more efficient, it's much more cost effective, and you don't have to pay nearly as many faculty nearly as much, because you're not really paying for them to live. You're kind of paying them a stipend effectively per course. It's much more efficient that way. Yeah.
And I'll just kind of add to that. We do have, so if you're a Spanish speaker, we do have ways of formation that we agree to, that we walk together in.
Oh, yeah.
If we have somebody who's in China and they're going to be formed as a pastor in place, we have ways to do that.
Yeah.
They're online and in person, so they're hybrid. But that is kind of what we've agreed to, is to walk together in these ways, even SMP, right?
Yeah.
So if we had agreed to that, so the residential is the only way.
Well, we're not doing residential. It's the only way. I'm agreeing with,
I'm saying
we're already not doing it.
I applaud you for raising this topic, because if we're focused on the person and their needs, then we should not say residential is the only way, because then we're excluding some of the things that we've already agreed to walk together in.
Right. The difference between higher education and any of the programs we're already using, I think I know all the acronyms. So if you want to give me a certificate, I'll take it. But the acronyms all concern some situation. All of those programs are in some measure hybrid. They're not purely online. There are meetings, there are gatherings. Even if the vast majority or all of this classroom instruction is online, there's other stuff that happens in person.
Well, thank you for the excellent presentation.
Yes, sir.
My name is Jacob. I'm from CSP. I'm a pre-seminary student.
How are you?
So my question is, we're talking about improving the quality of pastors at seminary.
Yeah.
How much do you think that can really be done at seminary, or before seminary does that need to be done? Is seminary really the place to improve the character of man, or is it mostly academic? How much can really be done there?
Yeah. The seminary is set up to provide a lot of academic training, but also to assess the man personally. Where that man comes from cannot be done by a seminary. Residential online. He's going to be the kind of man that he is based on the family he's come from and the way that he has learned the faith and where that's come from. No educational institution can fix that significantly. He can grow in those things. And you definitely grow in those things, I would say, especially in seminary, through your friends. Not because your friends are infallible, but because you learn how to have friends in the ministry so that you leave the ministry playing a team sport, because it is a team sport, even if you feel like an independent contractor. It's a team sport. So I don't think that, and I would say too, that if we're talking about the personal problems, they're usually stemming out of something that goes much farther back than he got to seminary and he was away from home and he was sad or something. It really doesn't have to do with the seminary. It has to do with, if we're talking about anger, like President Snow brought up, what was his dad like? And how did he learn to handle frustration? I can give him advice. I can talk to him about that, but no course of instruction is going to fix that. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yep. Great. Yep.
Hey, thank you for your talk. I really appreciated it.
Yeah, no worries.
I wanted to know if one of the prerequisites for being a good pastor is to be able to govern your house well. How do we know if somebody can govern their house well if they're not married?
Good question. Because it doesn't seem to have ever been a requirement that he get married to get ordained, as far as I know, right? There's probably a more profound historian in the room. That has to do with, that's in the New Testament because the general expectation is that a grown man is married. That's why it's there, laid out as a general thing. Similarly, you could get specific big personal problems that are not in the list, right? By the same token, does he know how to deal with people? So I would say really specifically, and this is definitely generationally apparent, is that if he cannot behave socially normally with people of a variety of ages, whether he's married or unmarried, he shouldn't be a pastor, because the job is the people. So that would be, I think you could have other ways of assessing, like, can he handle a meeting? Can he handle somebody saying you're totally wrong, and then he has to, not rage quit the meeting or whatever, Yeah, you can figure that out in other ways, but that's a really good question.
Reaction to something that you said, mentioned shortage a lot. And I've been thinking about this, whether we should use that language of clergy shortage.
Yeah.
Everybody's in the season of going to district conventions and whatnot, and we've been just hearing this right and left. We believe that the Lord is the Lord of the harvest. And so if there's a shortage, is that his problem? Is that his fault? Now, he does say, pray to the Lord of the harvest to send out workers.
Yeah.
And so I guess what I want to suggest is that we don't address this out of a state of fear, but rather faith.
Yeah.
That we do trust that he is the Lord of the harvest and that he will provide and is currently providing for his church. And then we get about the task of doing what faith does. Praying, identifying, raising up, supporting, and so forth.
Yeah, I agree with that. I could use the word shortage in the sense that we always want more, because the command to pray to the Lord of the harvest for workers is constant. It doesn't have an end, right? It's up to him to decide, this is the last guy I need ordained before I return. So the demand is constant. To talk about shortage the way we talk about it, though, I think makes our vision too small. We're looking with a focus that is too narrow on what is possibly currently needed by congregations that may or may not actually be able to support the man whom they are calling. That doesn't set them or him up for bliss. Instead, I think it would be better to say, the Lord of the harvest desires that all men are saved and come to a knowledge of the truth. I need more guys to do that. Some of them will be in this congregation and some of them will be in this other congregation. You're going to start helping, and some of them are not in your church right now, but you're going to meet them when you coach baseball or whatever. But the need is constant because the harvest is so large and ready.